All these voices. All these voices. All these things you can't explain. All these painful memories. They keep haunting you and daunting me. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoke and gasoline. It's just a ghost of you and me. Of you and me. All these whispers. All these footsteps in the rain. All these shadows in my mind. With my reflection I can't find. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoking gasoline. It's just a ghost of you and me. Of you and me. Don't let them take you away. Don't let them bring you down inside. It's just the mirrors in your mind. Don't let them bring you down.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Writer's Block. I am your host, horror author James Hershey Jr. And on tonight's episode, I thought it would be interesting and fun to take a trip through history, to take a look back at the medical field and some of the crazy ass things that doctors used to do that they really believed worked and made sense. Some of which are still used today to in a limited capacity, and some of which are completely not done anymore. We think they're nuts. Everybody who listens to this show knows that I love to do history shows. I'm a big history buff. I really enjoy it. This is one of those ones that's going to be fun, hopefully for you as well as me, because we're going to get to see some of the practices that were done by doctors, and most of the public bought into this. You know what I mean? I mean, nowadays when you go to the doctor, you trust that the doctor knows exactly what they're doing and that they have everything under control. But that's really not the case. In the past, it was no different. There was a lot of things that they thought worked and they thought were the best thing for you, and it turns out it was actually poison. That's going to bring us to the very first one we're going to talk about, and that is liquid mercury. It was a very popular medical treatment all the way back in ancient times, and it actually lasted until fairly recently. The ancient Persians and Greeks used it as an ointment, and 2nd century Chinese alchemists, they prized liquid mercury for its ability to increase lifespan and vitality. At least that's what they thought it did. That's not at all what it does. It'll pretty much kill you. Some healers even promised that by consuming mercury, sulfur, and arsenic, that a person could gain eternal life and even the ability to walk on water. Now, all of those things, mercury, sulfur, and arsenic, are all deadly. They're all poisonous. And if taken in any kind of large quantity, that will kill you. But I guess they must have limited the dosage to very little in order to survive it. Needless to say that, it did not work at all. You didn't get eternal life, but instead you pretty much ended up with an extremely painful death. Up until recent times, mercury was actually used to treat sexually transmitted diseases like syphilis. Once again, it didn't really work that well. It mostly killed people when they would try to do the treatments, and they would usually just blame it on whatever disease or ailment they were trying to cure, saying that that's what they died of, but most of the time it was mercury poisoning that actually killed them. The next thing that we're going to talk about is lobotomy. Now, everybody knows what a lobotomy is. You've heard that term a lot. In the early 20th century, doctors were just caught unaware by a deluge of patients with mental illnesses. They were just flooding the hospitals like crazy. One treatment that became popular in the 30s was the lobotomy, which is the removal of parts of the brain in order to curb depressive symptoms. So they believe that if they cut out part of your brain, that it will cure depression and cure mania and all kinds of different mental illnesses. Even at the time that they were actually doing these regularly, it was acknowledged that it was a very dangerous procedure, and it often left the patients that had the lobotomies, the ones that were, lucky enough to survive the procedure, it left them with a permanent disability. They pretty much could never function in society again. They lost a majority of their memories, and even their personalities changed. So they weren't the same person that they were before the procedure. Even with all that happening, over 40,000 people were lobotomized in the United States. And the sad thing about this, this is kind of a lighthearted and fun show, but the sad thing is a lot of these people were lobotomized without their consent, against their will. They weren't asked for approval, it was just done to them. Now, the procedure ended up declining in popularity as electroshock therapy and different medications came out that actually worked better, and they became more popular. The reason that the lobotomy, that they thought it worked to cure a lot of mental illnesses, is because by cutting out a portion of the brain, they changed your personality, and they took away a lot of your memories, and it changed who you were. So a lot of times you wouldn't be depressed and stuff anymore because you had no idea what was making you depressed in the first place. You didn't remember any of that stuff because that was just gone. And a lot of times you were little more than a drooling vegetable at the end of it, so it's kind of hard to show signs of a mental illness when you can't even communicate properly anymore. The next one we're going to talk about is radium. When mankind discovered radium, it led to a whole industry of radium-infused products, and also a whole bunch of different quack medicines that weren't real medicines, but they were marketed as medicines. One advertisement actually touted the benefits of preparing radioactive drinking water at home and said that it would cure a bunch of different ailments. Now, the risk of consuming radium wasn't understood at that time. It wasn't really well understood until much, much later. And it was because the workers that were making these radium-infused products started dying like horrible deaths. They started losing hair, teeth, basically just getting cancers all over. It was really bad the way they started to die. And then people started asking, what the hell's happening to all these people? Why are they dying? And, some research went in, and then they discovered, hey, it's not good to be around radioactive stuff. So, needless to say, this industry dried up, and they stopped making these kind of things. But at one time, it was extremely popular. The next one we're going to talk about is one that is actually still used today. Now, it's not approved today. It's not something that doctors say is a good idea, but it is something that has its own little cult following and underground industry, and it has to do with dieting. And that's probably why, even though it's really not good for you, it's probably why it's still being done, is because it's a diet thing. And anybody knows that people who are overweight will do just about anything to lose the weight. They will take all kinds of pills, they will try all kinds of weird fad diets, and they'll even do this, which is the tapeworm diet. Now, the tapeworm diet was an early 20th century method of weight loss, and it relied on the ingestion of a tapeworm. And basically what a tapeworm does is, once it gets into your body, it feeds off of the food that you eat. So when you eat food, the tapeworm inside of you eats some of that food, which cuts your caloric intake, which makes you lose weight. So it is an effective method of weight loss, at least to a point. But it is really, really not good for you, because many of the species of tapeworm that people ingest for this purpose have very bad effects on the human body. Some of the things that it can cause is malnutrition, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and even anemia in some cases, making you anemic. So it's not something that is wise to do. It's not something that is really safe to do. But the basic principle is, and it's funny because they still do this. You can actually buy pills which contain a baby tapeworm egg, or however it works. I think it's an egg. And you take the pill, and once it gets inside of you, the egg hatches, and boom, you have a baby tapeworm inside of you. It starts eating the food that you eat and growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And these things can get really, really big inside of you. And it'll just keep on eating until it eventually dies and you pass it out through your waste. Now that's best case scenario. But it's doing damage to you because you are not getting the nutrition that you're eating. As the tapeworm grows, it consumes more and more and more of your food that you eat, which causes you to suffer from malnutrition and not get the kind of nutrients that you need to have a healthy body. So it's not a wise idea, but believe it or not, there are a lot of people that do this. Even in today's society, they do it. And they claim that it works wonders and it helps them to stay thin. Now, to me, I would think that no matter how thin it makes you, it's not worth the risk to your health. But some people, they don't care. All they care about is being thin and looking good, and they're willing to do just about anything. The next one is a very strange one and a very painful sounding one. It is, and I gotta think of a way to say this politely and tactfully. It is a hot poker in your butt. Basically, that's not very nice, but that's what it is. It's a hot poker in your butt. This was used, believe it or not, as a cure for hemorrhoids. The way this one started is actually kind of weird as well, because it was once believed that if a person did not pray to this canonized Irish monk who was supposed to protect you from hemorrhoids, that you would end up suffering from hemorrhoids. And if you chose not to pray to the monk and then you got hemorrhoids, then what happened is they sent you off to the monks, and the monks would put a red hot iron in your anus, which is horrible. But I guess if you think about it, it would cure hemorrhoids, because basically what a hemorrhoid is an enlarging and a swelling of a blood vessel that runs through right underneath the skin in your butt. And so a red hot poker would essentially cauterize the wound. So I guess it would heal hemorrhoids, but to me it sounds more painful than the hemorrhoid would be. I would rather just have the hemorrhoid, honestly, than to have the red hot poker. That doesn't sound pleasant at all. Another method that they would use is you could sit on this famous rock that was named after the monk. It's where the 7th century monk was miraculously cured of his own hemorrhoids. And you could go and sit on that rock for a while. And if it worked and your hemorrhoids went away, then you didn't have to get the red hot poker in your butt. But if it didn't work, then you were facing the poker. And basically there's no reason that sitting on a rock is going to get rid of your hemorrhoids. So I doubt very seriously that it ever really worked. Now, what I don't understand is if you had hemorrhoids and you knew that you were going to be facing a red-hot poker jammed in your butt by monks, why the hell would you tell anybody you had hemorrhoids? Why wouldn't you just keep that to yourself? You know what I mean? That is not something that I would divulge to anybody if I knew that there was going to be some weird monk shoving a red-hot poker in my butt. That's just not something that I would look forward to or think would be in any way a pleasurable or acceptable experience. So I believe I would just keep it to myself. But for whatever reason, they didn't. This next one is going to be tree panning. Now, what tree panning is basically boring or drilling a small hole in the skull to expose the outer membrane of the brain, which is called the dura mater. The practice was done to alleviate pressure, and it was believed that it could cure epilepsy, migraines, and mental disorders as well. Now, nowadays they still use this method, although it's a little more high-tech nowadays because they actually have drills and stuff. But if you have, like say you fall and you hit your head and you get bleeding in the brain or fluid in the brain, and it starts to swell and cause a lot of pressure inside the cranial cavity, when that happens, they will actually drill a hole in your skull to release the pressure and let that blood or that fluid drain out, so that it reduces the swelling and reduces the intracranial pressure, and it can save your life. I mean, it's actually a medically viable procedure to have done. So they were kind of onto something here. Now, whether it cures epilepsy and migraines and mental disorders, I don't know. I doubt it, but you never know. It was also a pretty common fix during that time period for more physical problems such as skull fractures and blows to the head in combat. Now, these things here, I think when they used it that way to cure skull fractures and blows to the head in combat, I think they were using it then the same way we use it now, which is to alleviate pressure and swelling and blood and fluid on the brain. I think that is why they did it in that case. As far as curing migraines and mental disorders and epilepsy, I don't know if that's true or not. I seriously doubt it. But as you can see, they did it for several different reasons. Now, during the time when they were doing this back in the old days, the procedure was often fatal. And believe it or not, it really wasn't the fact that they were drilling a hole in your skull that killed you, because they got to the point where they were actually pretty good at that. So that didn't kill you. You survived the operation. What actually killed you was the same thing that killed most people, like during the Civil War. You know, the bullets didn't really kill most people. It was the infection afterwards. And the same thing here. Basically, the whole process was very unclean and unsanitary. They didn't understand microbes and germs, so they didn't know that they needed to sterilize all of their equipment and sterilize, you know, your head and sterilize the area that they're working in. They had no idea about all that stuff. So they would just go to work. And a lot of times the area was unclean, your head wasn't sterilized, the instruments that they used were used over and over again, they weren't sterilized. And so you had all these germs that gathered on everything. Plus, basically, just the environment they operated in was unclean. They weren't in an OR that was sterilized. They were just, you know, in wherever. And so all of these germs and dirty environments, they basically came into contact with brain tissue, because you're cutting a hole in the skull, which caused massive infections and killed people. Now, I mean, this goes all the way back to the Middle Ages and earlier, you know. So this was before a lot of the breakthroughs in science, but it's kind of interesting to me that we're still using that procedure to this day. Although we do it a lot better than they did. We have better tools. We have much better sanitary conditions, much better sterilization processes, so it's a lot safer now than it was then. But it's something that they did back then, and we actually still do today, which is kind of interesting. The next one we're going to talk about is intentional malaria infection. Okay, this is the process of actually getting people sick on purpose, which is kind of an interesting thing. A lot of people believe that the way to not get a deadly illness is to be exposed to a little bit of the deadly illness and build up immunities to it. That's basically the way the flu shot works today, and a lot of vaccines as well. We think that if you introduce a dead strain of the flu into the human body via a shot, then our body will develop antibodies and immunities to that strain of the flu, so that when a live strain of that flu comes, it won't make us sick, because our body is already prepared for it. It's seen it before, it knows what it is, and it's ready to defeat it and kill it. That's how the flu shot works. That's how a lot of our vaccines work. This is something along the same lines. Basically, it was an early version of what they used to call chickenpox parties, which involved intentionally infecting syphilis patients with malaria. Now, the theory was that the fever that was produced by the malaria would actually kill off the syphilis, and then the malaria would be cleared up through some other treatment. Now, that theory didn't work very well, because usually what happened when they would do this was the malaria just killed the person who had syphilis, and so that was it. The person just died. Now, let me go back a second. What a chickenpox party is where people would come over and they would intentionally get the chickenpox. They would all gather in a big party with somebody that had chickenpox so that they could all get it and be done with it, so they wouldn't get it again. That was a way to get it on their own terms, to where they were strong and they could take care of it. That's what a chickenpox party was. Now, this thing is kind of weird, because the idea was that they thought that the fever was going to kill the syphilis. But the problem is the malaria, which caused the fever, killed the patient. So, complete and utter failure. Now, it must have worked once or twice, otherwise they wouldn't have kept doing it for a while. You know what I mean? So there must have been some kind of success rate with it, but I can't imagine that it was a very high success rate, because in the research I've done, it said that the majority of the people just died from malaria when they were given it malaria to try to cure the syphilis. So I don't think it was a very good thing. The next thing is patent medicine. Now, what patent medicine is all those, like, you know when you see in old movies where they have the guy that's standing like on a little wagon or whatever, and he's hawking all these little bottles of cure-all miracle cures that are made from exotic sounding ingredients like snake oil and dragon's blood and all this stuff. That's where we get the term a snake oil salesman. Basically, what a patent medicine was some creation that somebody came up with and tried to sell as a medicine, claiming that it could cure all these different things, and in reality it cured none of them. And by the time you bought the medicine, took the medicine, and realized it didn't work, the guy that sold you the medicine was already moved on to another town, because they didn't stay very long in one place, because they knew if they did, they would get in trouble from the people that bought the medicine and it didn't work. They would come back mad. In today's society, they would write an angry email and demand their money back. Back then, they just might string you up from a tree or something. So you had to get the hell out of town if you were going to rip people off. And that's basically what this is. The people that sold these medicines, they knew damn well they didn't work. You know, they were just trying to sell and make some money. They knew that it wasn't a real medicine. You know, most of the time it was made from pseudo medical things that would have a tiny little effect on the body, but it really wouldn't cure or help anything. It just give them enough time to get out of town, basically. You know what I mean? So they knew that it was complete garbage, and they sold them anyway. They were really, really popular in the 18th and 19th centuries. And like I was saying before, they claimed they could cure everything from influenza all the way up just to the common cold, an upset stomach, gout, all those kind of things. Now, most of the times they would give them these really impressive sounding names like Dr. Bosch's German syrup, or Green's August flower, or you know, Dr. Pepper's miracle cure, or whatever. And basically what they usually were was just sugar water. And they would throw in some herbs that medically were pretty useless, but they wouldn't hurt you, so they figured that it would give it a herby, spicy kind of taste to it and make you feel like you're getting something medicine-y, because they would have that medicine-y taste, but they weren't harmful to you, but they weren't necessarily helpful either. And a lot of times they would also make tinctures of hard drugs and mix in with it, such as cocaine and opium and heroin and stuff like that. And they would put these in there with some sugar water and herbs, and then you would actually get an effect, but it wasn't a medicine that was curing anything. It would just get you high. Now, everybody knows the story of Coca-Cola and how in the beginning Coca-Cola actually had cocaine in it. And that's where the Coke from Coca-Cola comes from, is the cocaine. That's 100% true. A lot of the soft drinks, like Dr. Pepper, started out as a medicine just like this. But it was actually made by an actual, I believe a pharmacist was the one that made Dr. Pepper. And it was a mixture of a bunch of different things, and it did actually have a little bit of an effect. It wasn't just one of these patent medicines. It actually did help to settle your stomach and do, you know, little things for you. It wasn't like a cure-all, but it was a decent little thing. And it ended up getting made into a soft drink that we all enjoy. But that's how these sodas started out, is they would be sold in drugstores as either tinctures or as medicines, basically, to help settle the stomach. And they would have, like I said, Coca-Cola had cocaine in it, so it would cure a lot of different ailments that would bother you. You know, not major diseases, but it would cure little bitty things. You know, if you didn't, like, you know, fatigue, cocaine definitely cures fatigue. You know what I mean? I mean, you're not sleeping when you're on coke. It would cure like mental fogginess, and it would make you more alert. So it did have some uses, but overall it was not very good for you, and that's why it was, you know, they ended up taking it out and everything and making it illegal. It was also common for a lot of these patent medicines to have alcohol in them as well. I mean, basically that's what a tincture is anyway, is alcohol mixed with something else. But it would be alcohol, and they would also use as not only cocaine and heroin, but they also used morphine quite a bit back then, which everybody knows what morphine is. It is a very, very strong painkiller. So that would definitely have an effect on your body and help with whatever, you know, hurt. Basically, morphine would help it. They didn't work long term. Okay, just like if you take morphine now or you take a pain pill now, it doesn't take away the pain. It just covers it up for a little while. And that's the same thing that happened here. They didn't work really long term, but they did make you feel good for a little while. It was all ended by the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, which got rid of the patent medicine business completely and very, very quickly. The next one we're going to talk about is another strange one. It's dead mouse cures. Now, dead mice were used for medicinal purposes all the way back to ancient Egypt. What they would do is they would take the dead mice and they would blend them with other compounds to ease toothache pain. Later on in the time of Elizabeth I, the English used dead mice to cure their warts. They would cut the mouse in half. And this is gross, but this is what they did. They would cut the mouse in half, and they would take the cut part, the bloody part, and they would apply it directly to the wart. And it was supposed to get rid of the wart. Bits of dead mice were also used to treat whooping cough, the measles, smallpox, and even bedwetting, which is kind of weird. But believe it or not, there were some different varying degrees of success with these things. I'm not sure exactly which ones were successful and which ones weren't, but there were some success stories with it. And it's I don't know, it's just kind of, to me, it's strange. I don't see why a dead mouse would do any of those things. But I guess people do weirder things in the name of medicine. This next one is bloodletting. Bloodletting is the process of intentionally cutting somebody so that they bleed, and it's supposed to cure you or make you feel better. Doctors of the medieval period, they believed in what they called the four humors, which were the most important fluids in the body. These four humors were blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Now they believed that either an excess or a deficiency of any of these four humors would have a dramatic effect on a person's health. Many of the physicians in the Middle Ages felt that sick people, they just had too much blood. That was the problem. And it caused an imbalance in these humors, because you had too much blood in relation to all the other humors. And so there was an imbalance, and that's what was making them sick. And the only way that you could treat the person was to drain some of that blood away. Now they did this in two different ways. The first way was just cutting the area and letting you bleed. Now this hurt, and you also had the risk of infection and all that when you're cutting yourself or somebody is cutting you. So that was the least preferred method, but it was used. That's actually how George Washington died. George Washington got sick, and he wasn't doing well. And his doctor that came to the house, they actually bled George Washington multiple times throughout the night. And he just kept getting worse, so they thought, well, we got to bleed him some more. We got to bleed him some more. And he actually ended up bleeding to death. That's how George Washington died, because the doctor decided that he needed to bleed him more and more and more to make him better, but that's actually what killed him. So George Washington could have survived and lived longer if the doctor just wouldn't have showed up, basically, because the doctor is the one that killed him. But anyway, that's the first way. And the second way is with leeches. Now, leeches were the most popular way and the best way to do this, because one, it's not that painful to have a leech bite you. It doesn't hurt that bad. Two, when a leech bites you, it releases several different chemicals into your skin. The first of which is an anticoagulant, which causes your blood to not clot up in the area and cover the wound with a scab right away. That keeps the blood flowing so that the leech can drink it. This is helpful if you're trying to bleed, because scabs kind of stop bleeding, so you don't want to scab up. The second thing that a leech does is it actually emits like an antiseptic chemical onto your skin, which actually sanitizes and sterilizes the area, which will keep you from getting an infection. So it's actually rather a healthy way to do things. Doctors today still use leeches, believe it or not. They use it to help treat infection and to suck out the infection of a wound and suck out a lot of the dead area and stuff. They also use maggots to eat away dead flesh, which is very strange, but it's something they still do. And in all reality, there's not a whole lot of better ways to do it. I mean, you can have maggots there that'll eat away the skin that is dead and clean the area up, or you can go to it with a knife and cut away. But the problem when you cut away a lot of skin is you can't connect the rest of the skin back to itself. So then you end up having to do skin grafts and all that kind of stuff. So I guess it's a much better way to do it just to use maggots, but it's kind of creepy. I mean, I wouldn't be very comfortable with maggots crawling all over my wound. That's just, to me, counterintuitive. That makes me think, oh my God, that's bad. It's going to get infected. It's going to get bad. But in reality, it's the exact opposite. But anyway, it's still used today, leeches are. And they use them for medical procedures. And also, they use it for a thing called cupping, which is popular with the Hollywood stars, which is another form of bloodletting. The next one we're going to talk about is another strange one, but it is not a very unpleasant one, at least, and that is sex with a virgin. The idea that somebody who is infected with a sexually transmitted disease or a social disease can transfer it to a virgin through sex dates back at least to the 16th century, when the practice was first documented because powerful men were trying to get rid of syphilis and gonorrhea by having sex with virgins. Believe it or not, this ridiculous superstition continues in some parts of the developing world, especially Africa. And it's one of the leading causes of child rape in Africa, which is terrible, Now, I want to clarify, when I say that they can transfer the disease to a virgin, I don't mean that they can give the disease to the virgin and they still have the disease, because that's obvious. That's what happens. If you have syphilis or gonorrhea, whether you sleep with a virgin or somebody who's had sex before, that person is going to get that disease. That's just the way it works. That's how a sexually transmitted disease works, because it's transmitted sexually. It's right there in the name. But this was the idea that if you had syphilis or gonorrhea or something like that, that if you had sex with a virgin, that you would give the virgin the disease and you would be cured of it. So you would no longer have the disease because you passed it on. Not that you infected them and you still have it, but you passed it on, you see. So they have it now, you don't. And they still believe that in a lot of parts of Africa and places like that in the third world. And it causes people who have these diseases to rape children, basically, to try to pass the disease on to the child so they don't have it anymore. Now, a couple things about that. One, raping a child for any reason is wrong. Period. Raping anybody for any reason, for that matter, is wrong. You shouldn't be raping people. Second of all, especially a child. Second of all, how selfish is that? Through your own bad behavior, you have gotten a sexually transmitted disease. So you compound that bad behavior and bad judgment by trying to pass that disease on to someone else so that you don't have it anymore, but now you've given it to someone else, so somebody else has to deal with it. That sounds like bad karma to me. That is a bad decision on top of a bad decision. It's just terrible all around, if you ask me. This next one is smoking for your health. Now, this might sound crazy, but there was a time when doctors actually believed that smoking was good for you. Now, this was at a time when the dangers of smoking were not very well known. At least the general public didn't know very well about the dangers of smoking. And in a lot of the advertisements, they would talk about the health benefits of cigarettes. And in a lot of these advertisements, they would have actual endorsements from doctors who would say that this brand is better than any other brand because it does this good thing for your body and this good thing for your body. A good example of this is during the late 19th and 20th centuries, or early 20th century, late 19th, doctors actually suggested that the inhalation of the smoke from a cigarette was a really great therapy for asthma. Now, we all know today that that's the exact opposite is true. Okay, we know that if you have asthma, one of the last things on earth you want to do is smoke a cigarette, because that's going to diminish lung capacity, that's going to make it harder to breathe, and sometimes it causes asthma attacks. I would put that for somebody with asthma, I would put that right up there with climbing a mountain or running, sprinting up a mountain. You're not going to do that if you have asthma. You also shouldn't be smoking. But during that time period, doctors would actually say, yeah, if you have asthma, you should smoke cigarettes. That's the best thing for it. It's kind of dumb, but there's a bigger picture here, and that is the idea of appeal to authority, okay? Which is that people in lab coats are smart, they know more than you, so if somebody who is smarter than you is telling you to do something, then it must be good, you should just do it, and who are you to say that the doctors are wrong, because you're just a dummy, and the doctors are so much smarter than you, so just listen to them. One thing we've learned so far in this show is that doctors don't always know what's good for you. I mean, here they are telling you to smoke if you have asthma. We see that also in today's society, where doctors can never really figure out if something's good for you or bad for you. They will say eggs are great, they're the best thing ever for you, you should definitely eat eggs. And then, they're so healthy, and then a year from then they say, oh wait, nope, forget that. Eggs have cholesterol, that's bad for you, cholesterol's terrible. Don't eat eggs, they'll give you a heart attack, they're horrible, stay away from eggs. And then, 6 months later, oh wait, maybe you can have a couple eggs, but don't have a lot. But still stay away from eggs, but only have a couple. And then just recently they said, oh yeah, well eggs have cholesterol, but now we understand that it doesn't actually raise your cholesterol level or produce plaque in your arteries, so eggs are back on the table. Knock yourself out. Have as many eggs as you want, doesn't matter anymore. We saw it with pork. Make sure you cook your pork all the way well done, because otherwise you could get sick. And now they say, well, never mind, you don't have to cook your pork all the way. And probably another year from now, they say, wait, you know what, we were right the first time. You should probably be cooking your pork all the way, because you can still get sick. They don't really know. It's all guesswork in a white coat. That's all it is. There's very few things that we really, really know for sure. All they do is they look at the best evidence they have at the time, and they make up a rule. And they say, okay, new rule. This is what you have to do. Look, we're putting it on the fridge. You have to listen to us because we have white coats and we're doctors and we're smarter than you. And that's just the way it's going to be. So stay away from eggs. Make sure you don't smoke. Make sure you do this. Make sure you do that. And then new evidence comes along that proves that what they said before was complete nonsense. And then they come back out and they say, okay, wait a minute. Listen, everybody. Forget everything that we said about this because we're completely wrong. Now this is the answer. This is what you do now. And then in the future, they might find out they're wrong about that as well. So basically what happens is we change our entire lifestyle to try to be healthy over and over again. And we never know if we're doing good or we're not doing good. We don't know if what we're doing is going to hurt us or help us. You just don't know because they don't know. The people that are telling you this who are supposed to know, they don't really know. It's not 100% proven. It's just their theory at the time. Now, there are some things that are 100% proven, but a lot of this stuff is just guesswork. It's educated guesswork. Let's put it that way. It is based on some evidence, but it's not the end all of everything. You don't know for sure 100% on anything. So a lot of times they end up switching their story back and forth. And that is basically the idea of appeal to authority, is that somebody who is higher up the social ladder than you, that is supposed to be smarter than you, tells you what to do and you're just supposed to listen. There's a lot of that goes on in this society. The next one we touched on a little bit earlier, and that is electroshock therapy. Electroshock therapy did not go away. Okay, that's a misconception that a lot of people have. They think that that's something from the past that they don't do anymore. All they did was change the name a little bit. Okay, electroshock therapy is now called electroconvulsive therapy. And most times they don't even call it that, they just go by the letters. Okay, they say ECT. Now, electroshock treatments were first used in the 1940s, as an alternative to lobotomizing patients. who had either depression or mania. Before they started using electroshock therapy, they actually used seizures to treat hysterical blindness or fits. That goes all the way back to the 1700s. But the problem with using seizures is the inconsistency in the method of causing them, basically. They couldn't just cause a seizure on demand 100% of the time like they wanted to. Basically, they couldn't use anesthesia, and they really weren't able to get the proper consent, or at least not informed consent of their patient on what was going on and what they were doing to them. So there were a lot of problems with the whole seizure idea, but electroshock therapy caused the body to do the same basic thing, and it was believed that it would treat a lot of these maladies as well. Electroshock therapy gained a lot of really negative press because of the way it was depicted in films and popular fiction. You also had a lot of suicides of high-profile electroshock therapy patients, even some famous ones like Ernest Hemingway. Now, despite this, electroconvulsive therapy is still used as a legitimate treatment for severe depression, mania, and catatonia, which is being catatonic. So it's still being used today, and it is actually a legitimate therapy today. At least it's called legitimate today. But it's essentially the same thing as electroshock therapy. All they did really was change the name around because electroshock therapy got a bad rap and nobody wanted to deal with it, so they just kind of changed the name. The next one we're going to talk about is dwell. Now, dwell is a form of anesthesia. Now, the modern science of anesthesia is fairly new. It really only was perfected over the last 150 years, or at least become common practice, but it really wasn't perfected until modern times. But before that, doctors would knock you out however they could knock you out. One popular method to do this was they used something called dwell. Now, dwell was an herbal anesthetic made from 7 different ingredients. It had bile, lettuce, vinegar, birney root, hemlock, opium, and henbane. Now, some of these ingredients are fine. You know, they're innocuous, there's no big deal. But some of them are lethal. And when you mix them incorrectly, they are just as likely to kill you as they are to knock you out. And they're just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than the surgery that they're going to be doing on you. Now, even though how dangerous it was, dwell was a very popular anesthetic from the 12th century all the way to the 15th century. And it's even referenced in Hamlet by William Shakespeare. They talk about it there. The next thing we're going to talk about is paraffin wax injection. This was an early version of Botox. 19th century doctors would use injections of paraffin wax to smooth out wrinkles. And they also used them in breast augmentation procedures. See, you thought that boob jobs were a modern phenomenon, but they aren't. They go back to olden days too. People got boob jobs back then, but they used paraffin wax instead of silicone or saline. The problem with the paraffin wax is that wax hardens. And in this case, it actually hardened into thick and painful lumps known as paraffinomas. And it caused all kinds of problems. And once they understood that it was the paraffin wax causing the paraffinomas, they stopped using them, basically. Now, they weren't called paraffinomas before they figured out that it was the paraffin wax that was doing it. They named it that because it was the paraffin wax that was causing it. I tell you that because I don't want anybody to think, well, why didn't they just look at the name? They would have known exactly what the hell was causing it. It's very simple. It didn't have a name at first. They called it that because they realized it was the paraffin wax. The next one is something that's actually still in effect, and it is disgusting, but it is actually still being used. It's rather common practice in India and in that area of the world, and it's something that some people swear by, and that is medicinal urine. Now, there's no more homemade medicine than your own urine, and it was thought that human urine was a good antiseptic and that it could cure all kinds of things. Now, this is going to get gross. I'm just warning you because it's pee. But the Romans actually used human urine to whiten their teeth. Now, that's terrible. I can just imagine, Roman gladiators and soldiers, swishing and gargling urine. That's terrible. King Henry VIII's surgeon actually recommended that all battle wounds should be washed in urine. And then later on, urine was also used to treat sores that were caused by the Black Death. Now, as gross as it is, there is actually some scientific basis to using urine in these ways. Urine is sterile, and when it leaves the body, it comes out sterile. So, believe it or not, at that time period, it may have been a healthier alternative than using water, because the water that was available at that time was pretty foul. You had a lot of nasty stuff in the water back then. It wasn't polluted in the same way it is now with chemicals and toxic waste and that kind of stuff, but there was a lot of farming going on. There was a lot of manure runoff into the waterways, and people emptied their own waste into the water a lot as well. So when you would use a chamber pot or whatever, you would just dump it into the river. And so you had a lot of human waste in the rivers and animal waste. Now, the most concerning of this was fecal matter, poop, because fecal matter contains fecal coliform bacteria, which can get you very, very sick. So if you wash a wound with water that is contaminated by fecal coliform bacteria, then that wound's going to get infected, and it's going to most likely turn septic, and you're going to die. So, believe it or not, using urine on wounds was probably a better idea than using the polluted water, because at least it's sterile and it's not going to cause an infection. And it can clean out a wound of any kind of contaminants from the environment that are in it and cause it to heal better. Now, that being said, it's still gross in my mind. The next one is electric sex belts. Now, these things were very popular at the end of the 19th century, and they thought that it would treat the condition of female hysteria. Some of the symptoms of female hysteria were nervousness, weight gain, trouble sleeping, overall bitchiness and unpleasantness in a woman. And what the idea was that a woman would become angry and bitchy and irritable and just hard to get along with and argumentative if she did not have an orgasm for a long period of time. So basically, a woman would go to the doctor, and what the doctor would do is use basically a vibrator. They had all kinds of different versions of these. They had everything from something that looks almost like what they have today as vibrators to things that look like power drills, and electric sex belts that they would put on you. But they all did the same thing. They would all cause a woman to have an orgasm. Doctors found that after they gave a woman an orgasm, she was a lot more pleasant to be around. She didn't argue as much. She didn't complain as much. She wasn't as depressed. She wasn't as angry. And she was just better. She felt better. And because she felt better, her husband felt better because she treated him better and she took care of him better. So it was thought to be an all-around plus for society. Now, there is a lot of truth to this, I think. I don't think necessarily that it's a malady or that it is a a medical issue if a woman doesn't have an orgasm. Women may disagree with me on that, but there is no doubting that after a woman has an orgasm, she's much more pleasant. After a man has an orgasm, for that matter, he's much more pleasant. This is one of those that makes sense to me. No harm, no foul is what I say. You know, I don't see any problem with that. I don't see any reason why that shouldn't be something that a woman should be able to go do if she wants. I mean, it's not like she's having sex with somebody else. He's using a medical instrument on her to cause an orgasm. If it makes her happier and all that kind of stuff, what's the harm, I say. But basically, it was very popular in the 19th century, and they even had advertisements for all these different devices in the pages of catalogs like the Sears and Roebuck's catalog, you know, where you could actually buy one if you had enough money to have at home and plug into your wall and use to give your wife an orgasm so you didn't have to go to the doctor. But this is one of those ones that's really, really interesting, I think. And it's one that I say isn't really that bad of a thing. The next one is animal dung. Now, the waste of animals has been used for a long, long time to cure various injuries and as a remedy for various things. Now, this went all the way up until like the 19th century. One of these remedies was to ease a sore throat, and it included dried dog dung, which is ugh. The ancient Egyptians, they used the dung of a donkey, a cow, a dog, and a gazelle for numerous medical purposes. Now, sometimes using the animal dung would lead to tetanus, but other times the bacteria in the dung would actually have a healing effect on the body, which is very strange, but it is what it is. I don't know if I would do it. I mean, honestly, I don't know if I would trust it. One, it's dung. It's crap. It's gross. You know, I wouldn't want to put it in my mouth or put it on my body in any way. But I guess that's just because of our time, though. You know, back then it was considered normal, so I guess it would have been no big deal. The next one is medical astrology. Now, medicine in the medieval era was guided just as much by superstition as it was by knowledge. And medical astrologers were so revered that people actually thought that they were real-life magicians. They would go and they would consult these guys on all kinds of different things. They would consult them about the weather, about how their crops were going to be that year, about child rearing, and also about sicknesses. Doctors would actually refer to special calendars that had star charts in them, and they would help them to diagnose whatever was wrong with you. By the 1500s, the physicians of Europe were actually legally required to assess a patient's horoscope before the treatment of the patient. Now, after the patient's star chart was examined and was compared to the current position of the stars, then their ailment could be predicted and then treated. Checking your star chart before you treat somebody for a medical condition is nuts, in my opinion. Now, there might be a lot of people out there listening to this right now that are going to say, James, come on, man. Astrology is awesome. It's great. You know what I mean? It works completely well. Now, I'm not talking about the little horoscope you find in the newspaper. That's obviously bullcrap. You know what I mean? That's garbage. But there are people out there that will tell you that real astrology is actually a science. It is actually a real thing. It's not garbage. It's not made up crap. Now, there are some uses for the stars. There are some uses for, you know, the alignment of the stars and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think that treating you medically is one of them. I also don't think that you can say just because I'm born in a certain month that you can tell me everything about my personality. I just don't believe it. I don't believe it. Now, I haven't done a lot of research into that. just so you know, being 100% honest and truthful here, I can't 100% say that astrology is nonsense because I have not done the research. So I don't know for sure. But my gut instinct is it's crap. But maybe I'll do the research and then maybe I'll do a show on it one day. Whenever I finish the research and I can tell you definitively whether it is crap or not crap. But for now, I'm just going to say my gut instinct is it's garbage. The next one we're going to talk about is the keister. This was a device that was used to give enemas, basically. And ironically, it's where the term keister comes from. You know, the term for a person's butt, they call it your keister. That's where that comes from, is this device. Enemas have been used as a treatment for intestinal issues since all the way back to the Middle Ages. And the keister is the device that they use to do that. It's a long metal tube that has a cup on the end, basically. The tube would be put into the body through the anus, and a medicinal fluid would be poured into the device and introduced into the colon by pumping the tube. There's a thing on the end of it that you can use to pump it. One of the most common fluids that were used for this was a concoction that was made up using boar's bile, which they believed at the time had very positive health benefits for you. Other fluids that might be used included anything from salt, baking soda, soap, bran, herbs, honey, chamomile, even coffee. Believe it or not, coffee enemas are still a very, very popular thing, and they are said to have very beneficial qualities to them. They're supposed to be very healthy for you. There are some doctors that argue with that and say that they aren't, that you shouldn't be putting coffee in your butt, but those people probably don't know a whole lot about coffee enemas. Experts on coffee enemas say they're great. A lot of people that do coffee enemas every day, they say they love them, they're wonderful, and they couldn't live without them. They have been known to help with pain issues, with fatigue, with sickness. One reason for that is you're able to absorb a lot of things through your butt. What happens is you actually absorb it through the skin and it gets into your system. So that caffeine from the coffee goes directly into your system. It doesn't have to go through your mouth, your stomach, your intestines and get absorbed slowly. It's an instant boost of caffeine. Now, coffee has a lot of good properties, antioxidant properties as well to it, and all of those benefits get absorbed quickly as well into the body. So there is science that backs up coffee in them as being a good thing. But as with everything, it has its detractors as well. King Louis XIV of France is said to have had over 2,000 enemas during his reign. And sometimes he would even have enemas given to him while he was sitting on his throne, which is kind of funny. The last one we're going to talk about is going to be shark cartilage. This is a fairly recent addition, and what they do is they take shark cartilage and they grind it up and they put it into pills, and they actually use it to treat cancer. Theories about the healing power of shark cartilage began in the 1950s, and they came from research by a Harvard researcher named Dr. John Pruden. Now, recent studies have showed that there are no health effects as a result of taking shark cartilage. It doesn't help and it doesn't hurt. And Pruden was never able to really conclusively prove that shark cartilage worked with cancer or helped with anything else. Now, that's not to say that there is no effect from taking shark cartilage pills, because there is. Now, it is true that there is no real health benefits to the human body from taking shark cartilage pills, but one effect that it does have is a huge reduction in the worldwide shark population, which is really a terrible thing. Now, a lot of people look at sharks and they say, well, less sharks is good because less chance of me getting bit by one then. But here's the problem. Whenever you take something like a shark, which is a wonderful, beautiful killing machine, okay? You take that out of nature. That animal is there for a reason. It's not just to make your day worse. It's not just to scare you when you go into water. A shark is there to take out wounded fish or sick fish that could contaminate a lot of other animals, okay? So a shark plays a vital role in the ecosystem of the oceans. And by removing great numbers of sharks, you are essentially removing nature's way of dealing with a problem. So you're going to have more sick fish that are going to not get eaten by sharks. So they're going to infect the rest of the population of fish around them, which will get sick and then infect more fish. And next thing you know, you have huge sections of fish that are dying off, which is less food for everybody, which is also more damage to the ecosystem, because less fish mean that there's a lot more of the smaller things that the fish eat, and it screws everything up, okay, basically. So we should not be eliminating any species from the earth if we can help it, because all species play some kind of role. Now, you could argue with that a little bit and say that there are some that don't, such as the mosquito. I don't really know what purpose a mosquito serves. Now, I'm sure that there are people out there that know. And one of you might even listen to this show and might say, well, James, a mosquito serves this exact purpose right here. And you very well may be 100% correct. I do not know that information. I have not researched it. But all I know is mosquitoes spread a lot of disease and they're kind of a pain in the ass. So I would be fine with mosquitoes being gone. But once again, you say that, and then if it happens, then all of a sudden you realize, oh wait, mosquitoes were important, because if they weren't around, then whatever would get out of control, and then it would be terrible. So basically everything serves some kind of purpose, otherwise it wouldn't be here. So I guess we just have to deal with mosquitoes, and I guess they shouldn't be really killing sharks. I think sharks are beautiful creatures anyway. I don't know why you would want to kill a shark, but people kill what they're afraid of and what they don't understand. That's been true since the beginning of mankind. So that's probably why people are killing off sharks. But that being said, those are some very weird and wacky and sometimes even gross and crazy things that doctors used to say are good for you and used to use as actual treatments, and they're just not used that much anymore. Now, a couple of the things that I talked about tonight were, they're still used, but the majority of them aren't. So I hope you enjoyed this show, and if you did, please hit like and subscribe, and check out some of our other shows. I'd like to give a shout out real quick to Valley Vapors in Woodstock, Virginia. These guys are a vape shop in my area, and they do a whole lot of stuff to help out our vets. And with it being Memorial Day weekend and everything, I'd like to give them a special shout out, because I have been blessed enough to be involved in several charity events now with them, where we've been able to raise a good amount of money to help our troops as they come home, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. So thank you to Valley Vapors. Shout out to you guys. Thank you to all of our troops who have served, whether you fought in a war or you served stateside or whatever you did. If you served our country, then thank you very much for your service. I love you very much, and I appreciate everything you do. Until we speak again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. Bye-bye.